All right, so you sent over a ton of info on this Cesar Rosales and his mountain guiding operation down in Peru. It seems like you're getting ready for like a pretty amazing trip, and we're here to help you kind of make the most of it. We've got websites detailing everything from Rosales' own climbing achievements to like potential trip itineraries, and even what's included, and just as important, what's not included.
Yeah, planning an adventure like this really requires transparency.
For sure.
Yeah.
So, what jumps out at you from all this material? What's grabbing your attention? Specific peaks, the different treks, or maybe those speed records that Rosales has.
I mean, those are all good things to consider when planning a trip. But before we get into like the specifics of things like climbing Huascaran or doing the Huayhuash trek, let's find out more about the man himself, Cesar Rosales.
Makes sense. I mean, he's the person you're going to be trusting with your safety and your adventure, right?
Exactly. Cesar Rosales was born in 1982 and is certified by the IFMGA, which means he's met the highest international standards for guiding in the mountains.
For someone who's not super familiar with all the mountaineering certifications, what does being an IFMGA guide actually mean?
That's a great question. IFMGA stands for the International Federation of Mountain Guides Associations. It's like the gold standard for mountain guiding worldwide. To become certified, guides go through rigorous training and testing in all aspects of mountaineering, from rock and ice climbing to glacier travel, avalanche safety, and even first aid and rescue.
So it's not just about knowing how to climb, it's about having like a comprehensive skill set to handle any situation that might arise in the mountains.
Exactly, and it means you're in expert hands, which is especially important when you're tackling challenging expeditions.
Okay, so that definitely checks the experience box for me. Getting back to Rosales, I see he trained at the School of Guides Don Bosco in Peru, and he leads expeditions all over the world, not just in Peru, right?
You got it. He's a true global mountaineer. And speaking of global, he speaks multiple languages: Spanish, Quechua, English, and Italian.
That's impressive. Speaking of Italian, he's sponsored by Montura, an Italian company known for their mountain gear, right?
Mm.
Does that sponsorship say anything about his skills as a climber?
You picked up on something very important there. Montura is very highly regarded in the mountaineering world, and they're very selective about who they sponsor, so it speaks to his expertise and professionalism.
So we've got a highly qualified, internationally experienced guide who clearly loves what he does. Let's talk about where all of this takes place. The Cordillera Blanca and Huayhuash mountain ranges of Peru.
These are two of the most visually stunning mountain regions in the entire world. Picture this: massive glaciers, lagoons with this unbelievable blue water, and peaks so sharp they practically poke holes in the sky.
Okay, I'm starting to see why you're so drawn to these areas. But can we break it down? What makes these two ranges so different?
The Cordillera Blanca, which translates to White Range, is famous for those massive peaks, including Huascaran, the highest mountain in all of Peru. It's a bit more developed than Huayhuash, with set trekking routes and base camps.
So that's likely where these iconic summit climbs happen, right? What about Huayhuash?
Huayhuash is a little more rugged, known for being remote and beautiful, and it's got some really tough trails. It's definitely a more intense, wild experience, fewer crowds, and a heightened sense of adventure.
So for someone looking for a real wilderness experience, Huayhuash might be the way to go.
You nailed it.
Two unique mountain ranges, each with its own unique appeal. Do you think that the specific treks and expeditions that Rosales offers might end up influencing which range is the better choice?
I think that's a great point. What we've seen so far in the materials you provided suggests there might be a stronger pull toward Cordillera Blanca based on what he specializes in. But before we even think about that, we need to talk about something crucial: acclimatization.
You're talking about adjusting to the altitude, right? Because
Yeah.
this isn't like taking a stroll in the park. This is serious altitude.
Exactly. You can't just jump off the plane and start summiting these massive peaks. Your body needs time to adjust to the thinner air. And the great thing is, Rosales offers some fantastic day trips that are both scenic and help you acclimatize.
So you're not just sitting around like twiddling your thumbs.
Not at all. These day trips take you to some of the most incredible lagoons in the Cordillera Blanca. Laguna 69, for example, is famous for its unbelievable turquoise water, and Laguna Churup is nestled right at the foot of this towering peak.
It sounds like those easy hikes still pack a punch when it comes to scenery. What's the benefit of doing these before a bigger climb?
Think of them as getting a taste of what's to come and a chance to get used to the altitude. The views alone are worth it. Imagine seeing Huascaran, Topocalqui, and Chacaraju up close, even on a shorter hike.
What does that acclimatization process actually look like, though? I'm guessing there's more to it than just going on a few hikes.
You're right. It's about gradually exposing your body to higher altitudes. The hikes are part of it, but Rosales also structures his expeditions to include rest days at specific altitudes. It gives your body time to catch up, produce more red blood cells, which helps you carry oxygen more efficiently. It's essential for preventing altitude sickness.
So it's not just about the physical challenge of the climb. It's about respecting the physiological demands of high altitude.
Exactly. And that's where having a guide like Rosales, who understands the science behind acclimatization, is crucial for a safe and successful expedition.
Okay, so we've established that acclimatization is key. What about the main event, the trekking and mountaineering that Rosales specializes in? It seems like he offers a pretty impressive range of options.
The variety really is impressive. He seems to cater to everyone from seasoned climbers to those who are just getting started.
All right, you've piqued my curiosity. Let's dive into some of these options.
Well, let's start with the Huayhuash track, since we were just talking about that region. It's a 10-day journey through some truly wild and remote landscapes. Plus, you get the chance to summit a 5,000-meter peak called Diablo Mudo, which means mute devil. How cool is that?
I love that name, Mute Devil. So that's a pretty challenging trek. What if someone's looking to, get a feel for climbing at 6,000 meters?
Rosales offers a 7-day trek called the Valley Ishinka Trek, which takes you to the summit of 3 peaks, Ishinka, Uruz, and Toklaraju. It's a great way to test your limits at higher altitudes.
That's an excellent option for aspiring high-altitude climbers. Are there any options for someone who's after, truly epic views?
Oh, there is. The Santa Cruz and Nevada Pisco Trek is 9 days long and takes you past truly breathtaking scenery and over a challenging mountain pass.
Okay, so that one's all about the visual experience. Are there any, really ambitious treks that link multiple iconic peaks?
Absolutely. Rosales offers the Cedros, Alpamayo, and Huascaran trek, which connects two of the most iconic peaks in the Cordillera Blanca over a 14-day adventure. That one definitely has a wow factor.
It's amazing how much variety he
Yeah.
offers. I was looking through the details, and one thing that stood out to me is that all of these treks include mules and donkey drivers to help
Oh,
carry
wow.
gear.
It's not something you see every day, is it?
Not at all. It sounds like a really unique experience. Is it mainly for convenience, or is there a cultural aspect to it as well?
I think it's both. From a practical standpoint, not having to carry a heavy pack makes the trek a lot more enjoyable, especially at higher altitudes.
I can imagine every ounce counts when you're dealing with that thin air.
Exactly. But beyond the practical benefits, it adds a really interesting cultural layer to the experience. These mule and donkey drivers are often from local communities, and they have incredible knowledge of the mountains and the trails.
So it's like having local experts as part of the team, sharing their knowledge and stories.
Right. Plus, it provides employment for these communities and helps support the local economy, which is always a good thing.
So it's a win-win situation. Now, of all the options, which trek sounds the most appealing to you?
Tough choice. They all sound amazing, but I think I'm leaning towards that Huayhuash trek, the remoteness, the chance to summit Diablo Mudo. It's calling my name.
It sounds incredible. But before we start daydreaming about summiting mountains, let's talk about those Conquer the Giants expeditions Rosales offers. This is where things get really interesting.
This is the stuff that dreams are made of for many climbers. We're talking about expeditions to some of the most iconic peaks in Peru, with all the challenges and rewards that come with that.
So what peaks are on the menu?
Let's start with the big one, Huascaran South. It's the highest mountain in all of Peru. A challenging climb, for sure, but it's classified as technically moderate.
So it sounds like it's more about physical endurance than, super technical climbing skills.
You got it. Then we have Alpamayo, which is famous for being incredibly beautiful and shaped like a pyramid, and for the technical ice climbing it requires.
Alpamayo. Even the name sounds epic.
It is. Imagine standing on that summit, surrounded by razor-sharp peaks.
Yeah.
It's truly breathtaking. Then there's Artesan Raju, another pyramid-shaped peak. It's often called the second most beautiful mountain in Peru.
We've got the highest, one of the most technical, and the second most beautiful. That's a pretty impressive lineup.
It is, and Rosales has quite an impressive track record on these peaks.
Okay, that's heard.
He's summited Alpamayo 41 times and Huascaran South 45 times. That's an incredible level of experience.
It's not just about knowing the route at that point. It's about knowing every nook and cranny of those mountains.
Exactly, and that kind of experience translates into safety and confidence for the climbers that he guides.
Speaking of the team, who else is involved in these expeditions besides Rosales?
One thing that impressed me is that he's assembled a really international team with guides from Italy, Chile, Bolivia, and Nepal. It adds this whole other dimension to the experience.
I love that. It's not just about climbing a mountain, it's about connecting with people from different cultures and backgrounds who share that same passion for adventure.
Right. And one member of the team, Pasang Ongchu Sherpa, has actually summited Everest twice.
Whoa. Okay, that definitely adds another level of wow factor.
Right. Just think of the experience and knowledge he brings to the team.
So we've got this amazing team of internationally experienced guides, led by Cesar Rosales, who has this incredible track record on some of the most iconic peaks in Peru. We've got the option of trekking through the remote Huayhuash range or taking on one of those legendary peaks in the Cordillera Blanca. And we know that even the acclimatization hikes are going to be incredible.
It's shaping up to be a pretty epic adventure, isn't it?
It really is. But before we get too carried away planning which peak we're going to conquer, let's get down to the practicalities. What exactly is included in these trips? And maybe more importantly, what's not included?
That's a crucial question. Transparency is key when planning a trip like this, and thankfully Rosales' website is very clear about what's included and what's not.
Okay, good to know. So what does the price typically cover?
Generally, you can expect the price to include transportation within Peru, all your meals during the expedition, the guide fees, of course, and any group equipment like tents and cooking gear.
That's pretty comprehensive. What about personal gear like sleeping bags and climbing boots?
You'll need to bring your own personal gear, including those items, along with appropriate clothing for high altitude conditions and any personal medications that you might need.
Knowing this in advance helps with budgeting and avoids any surprises later on.
Exactly. And one other thing that's not included is tips for the guides and crew. It's customary in Peru, and it's a great way to show your appreciation for their hard work and expertise.
Okay, good to keep in mind. Now, with all this information in mind, it seems like you're off to a good start with planning your Peruvian adventure.
I'd say so. We've covered a lot of ground, but there's always more to learn.
There is indeed. And speaking of learning more, I just realized we haven't even touched on those speed records Rosales holds on several peaks. Do you think that adds another layer to the experience, knowing your guide has accomplished something like that?
What's fascinating here is that it adds another dimension to the whole experience. You're not just enjoying the views and the challenge, you're also aware that the person guiding you has pushed the limits of what's possible on these mountains.
It makes you wonder about your own limits too, right?
Right.
Could I push myself harder? Could I, shave off a few minutes from my time? It almost becomes a personal challenge within the bigger adventure.
Exactly. And it gives you insight into Rosales' mindset. He's clearly driven and ambitious, which are great qualities to have in a guide, especially on a difficult expedition.
It definitely speaks to his passion and expertise. But I also think it highlights the importance of safety, right? Because speed and safety need to go hand in hand, especially in a challenging environment like the mountains.
You hit the nail on the head. It's a delicate balance. And from everything we've learned so far, it seems Rosales is very meticulous about safety and risk management. He wouldn't have those speed records if he wasn't.
It's not just about going fast. It's about going fast safely. And having a guide who understands that is crucial. We talked earlier about the mule and donkey drivers being included in the tracks. I'm curious to know more about what role they play in the overall experience.
Well, on a purely practical level, they make the journey a lot easier for the climbers. Not having to carry a heavy pack allows you to really enjoy the trek, soak in the scenery, and conserve your energy for the climbs.
That makes a lot of sense, especially when you're talking about high altitudes where every ounce of energy counts.
Exactly. But it goes beyond just convenience. These mule and donkey drivers are often from the local communities, and they have such a deep connection to the mountains. Their knowledge of the land and trails is incredible. They really become part of the team.
It's like having local experts guiding you along the way, sharing their insights and stories.
Precisely. It creates a connection to the local culture and traditions that you wouldn't experience otherwise.
So it's not just about lightening the physical load, it's about adding depth and meaning to the entire journey. You mentioned earlier that Rosales' website is very clear about what's included in the price and what's not. One thing that came up was the entrance fee to Huascaran National Park.
Right, because a lot of these treks and expeditions actually take place within the park boundaries.
Yeah.
It's currently $45 per person, so it's definitely something to factor into your budget.
I also noticed on the website that some treks, like the one to Laguna 69, might have an additional entrance fee for specific areas within the park.
Good catch. It's always best to check the specifics for each trek or expedition to avoid any surprises. Let's talk about the difficulty levels for all of these adventures. Some of those climbs are bound to be way more challenging than others. Rosales does a good job of categorizing each trip on his website in terms of how technically difficult it is.
So, for example, the Huascaran South expedition is listed as moderate, but the Alpamayo expedition is difficult.
Exactly. But it's important to remember that even a moderate climb at high altitude is going to be physically demanding.
That altitude really is a game changer. It adds a whole other layer of challenge.
Absolutely. So it's important to be honest with yourself about your fitness level and experience when choosing an expedition. If you're unsure, it's always better to err on the side of caution.
Better to start with something you can handle and work your way up to the bigger challenges.
Hmm.
One other thing I noticed on the website is that Rosales includes reserve days in the itineraries for some of the expeditions.
That's a really smart move on his part. It shows he understands how unpredictable mountain weather can be and how important it is to have some flexibility.
You wouldn't want to be on a tight schedule if a snowstorm hits or the winds pick up.
Exactly. Those reserve days give you a buffer, which can really reduce stress and make the whole experience more enjoyable. It's not just about reaching the summit, it's about the whole journey. Speaking of timing, is there an ideal season for these treks and expeditions? The best time to visit the Cordillera Blanca and Huayhuash is during the dry season, which runs from May to September. That's when you're most likely to have clear skies and stable weather.
So better chances of good weather and summit success during those months.
For sure. But even during the dry season, mountain weather is unpredictable. It's essential to be prepared for anything. The wet season, which runs from October to April, has higher risks of rain, snow, and landslides.
Not the ideal conditions for trekking or climbing.
Right. But I've heard some people actually enjoy the solitude and the unique landscapes of the wet season, even though it's less predictable.
So if someone wants to experience the mountains with fewer crowds, the wet season might be an option, but with added risks.
Exactly. It really comes down to personal preference and risk tolerance.
We've talked about altitude being a factor, but what about the physical demands of the treks and climbs themselves? What kind of fitness level are we talking about here?
You definitely need to be in good shape for these treks and climbs. We're talking about multi-day adventures with significant elevation gains, often on challenging terrain.
This isn't your casual weekend hike in the park.
Not exactly. You need stamina, strength, and endurance to handle the long days of trekking and climbing. And even though you have mules and donkey drivers to help carry gear, you'll still be carrying a pack, so upper body strength is important too.
It's about being prepared both physically and mentally for the challenges that come with mountaineering. What would you recommend for someone who's thinking about joining one of these adventures but isn't sure they're physically ready?
I'd say start training well in advance. Focus on cardio, strength training, and if possible, some altitude simulation to get your body used to lower oxygen levels.
That makes sense. We talked earlier about accommodations being included in the price, but I'm curious about what types of accommodations are typically offered.
It really depends on the trip. For most of the longer treks and expeditions, you'll be camping in tents.
So those who love the simplicity and adventure of camping will be happy. What about the tents themselves?
Rosales provides high-quality tents that are designed for high-altitude conditions, so you'll be warm and protected from the elements.
Are there any options for people who aren't as into camping?
For some of the shorter treks or acclimatization hikes, you might stay in mountain huts or lodges, which offer basic accommodations and meals.
That's a nice option for a little more comfort and a chance to connect with other trekkers.
Right. And then, of course, there are hotels in the towns, like Huaraz, where you'll likely stay before and after the trek or expedition. We've touched on the cultural element a bit with the mule and donkey drivers, but I'm wondering if there are any other opportunities for cultural exchange during these expeditions. Does Rosales incorporate any interaction with local communities or the indigenous culture of the Andes?
It's a good question, and I think the answer is a bit nuanced. While Rosales' focus is primarily on the mountaineering aspect of the trips, the fact that he includes local guides and support staff, like the mule and donkey drivers, naturally creates those opportunities for cultural exchange.
So even though it's not the main focus, those interactions with local people can provide glimpses into the culture and traditions of the region.
Exactly. And Rosales himself speaks Quechua, the indigenous language of the Andes, which allows him to communicate with local people and share their stories and perspectives with the group. I think those interactions can add a deeper layer of meaning to the entire experience. It's not just about the mountains. It's about the people and the culture that make those mountains so special.
I agree. It's about approaching the experience with respect for the environment and a willingness to learn from the people who live there.
We've talked about the importance of being physically and mentally prepared for these adventures, but what about gear? What equipment is absolutely essential to bring on a trip like this?
You definitely need to think carefully about your gear, especially if you're tackling a high altitude expedition. First and foremost, you need a solid pair of mountaineering boots. They need to be sturdy, waterproof, and provide excellent ankle support.
They're your foundation, so it makes sense to invest in a good pair. What about other essential gear?
You'll need crampons for walking on ice and an ice axe for balance and self-arrest, depending on the specific expedition. For clothing, the key is layering. You'll need base layers to wick away moisture, insulating layers for warmth, and a waterproof outer shell to protect you from the elements.
It sounds like being prepared for all types of weather is crucial.
The weather in the mountains can change in an instant, so layering is key. And don't forget about accessories like gloves, a hat, and sunglasses for protection from the sun and wind.
So far, we've covered boots, crampons, an ice axe, layered clothing, and sun protection. Anything else we should add to the essentials list?
A backpack to carry everything, of course. You'll need a sleeping bag rated for sub-zero temperatures and a sleeping pad for insulation and comfort. You'll also need a headlamp for those early morning starts and those late night treks back to camp.
Good point. All those little things can make a huge difference in terms of comfort and safety. And of course, a first aid kit is crucial for any adventure. What about food and water?
Rosales typically provides all the meals during the expeditions, but you'll need to bring your own snacks and water purification tablets or a filter.
Staying hydrated at high altitudes is crucial for avoiding altitude sickness, right?
Exactly. And snacks are always good to have on hand, especially when you're feeling depleted after a long day of trekking or climbing.
We've covered a lot of practical advice, but
Right.
what about capturing the memories of this incredible journey? What would you recommend bringing along for that?
A camera, of course, is a must-have for capturing those incredible landscapes and those epic summit shots. You'll want to be able to relive those moments. But there's something else I recommend bringing. A journal.
I love that. Not just the visual memories, but the emotional ones too. What do you find valuable about journaling during an experience like this?
When you're in the mountains, surrounded by such powerful beauty, you experience a range of emotions. Awe, excitement, maybe even fear or frustration. Journaling helps you process those feelings, and those raw emotional memories often end up being the most powerful and enduring.
It's also a great way to reflect on the challenges and triumphs of the journey and document the personal growth that often comes from pushing yourself outside your comfort zone.
You get it. Bring your camera for the visual splendor, and bring your journal to capture the heart and soul of the experience.
We've talked a lot about Rosales and his team prioritizing safety, but what are some things you can do to prepare for the potential risks on a mountaineering expedition?
Even with the most experienced guide, it's essential to take personal responsibility for your own safety. Make sure you have travel insurance that covers high-altitude trekking and climbing, and that includes emergency evacuation.
Accidents do happen, and it's better to be prepared.
Absolutely. Also, check in with your doctor before you go to make sure you're physically up to the challenges of high altitude.
So a medical checkup is a must.
Yes. And once you're on the trip, listen to your body, stay hydrated, and acclimatize properly. Those are the keys to preventing altitude sickness. And know the symptoms: headache, nausea, dizziness. Don't hesitate to tell your guide if you're not feeling well.
So be proactive and speak up if you're having any issues. What else can someone do to stay safe in such a demanding environment?
Always follow your guide's instructions, be aware of your surroundings, and respect the power of nature.
Those are great principles to follow in any outdoor adventure.
For sure. And always be ready for changing weather conditions. Make sure you have the right gear and know how to use it.
It's about being prepared, knowledgeable, aware, and respectful of the environment.
Exactly. You can enjoy the adventure while minimizing risk when you have all of those things in place. We've talked about the practicalities of these expeditions, but I think it's important to acknowledge the emotional and spiritual side of being in the mountains.
I agree. There's something almost magical about being surrounded by those massive peaks. What are some of the intangible benefits you might experience on a trip like this?
That's where the real magic happens. Beyond the physical challenges and the stunning scenery, there's a deep sense of awe and wonder that comes from being in the presence of those towering mountains.
It's like connecting to something bigger than yourself.
Exactly. And there's this incredible sense of accomplishment and empowerment that comes from pushing your limits and doing something you never thought you could do.
I imagine there's also a sense of peace and clarity that comes from being immersed in nature, away from the noise and distractions of everyday life.
Absolutely. The mountains have a way of stripping away all the superficial stuff and showing you what truly matters.
So it's not just a physical journey, it's a journey of self-discovery and transformation.
That's a great way to put it. It's an opportunity to connect with something deeper within yourself and appreciate the beauty and power of the natural world.
That makes me wonder what kind of person is drawn to these kinds of adventures in the first place. What are some shared qualities or motivations you've observed?
There's definitely a sense of adventure, a desire to push boundaries, and a willingness to embrace the unknown that unites these individuals.
They have a can-do spirit and a willingness to step outside their comfort zones.
Absolutely. But there's also a deep appreciation for nature and a respect for the power of the mountains that really stands out.
It's not about conquering the mountain, it's about being in harmony with the environment.
Exactly. And there's a sense of humility that comes with realizing how small we are in the grand scheme of things.
I imagine there's a strong sense of community among climbers as well.
Definitely. There's this incredible camaraderie that develops when you face those challenges together and support each other along the way.
So it's not just an individual pursuit, it's a collective experience that creates lasting bonds.
Exactly. And it's a chance to learn from each other, share knowledge and skills, and inspire each other to achieve great things.
Let's talk about some of the challenges that you might face on a mountaineering expedition. We've already mentioned altitude sickness and changing weather conditions, but what are some other obstacles you might encounter?
Physical fatigue is a big one. These treks and climbs are demanding, and you're pushing your body to its limits.
Those long days of hiking and climbing, especially at altitude, must take a toll.
They do. Mental toughness is just as important as physical strength. There will be times when you want to quit, when the climb feels too hard or the weather is terrible.
Resilience and determination are crucial qualities to have.
Absolutely. And then there's the unpredictable nature of the mountains themselves. You might encounter things like rockfall, crevasses, or even avalanches, all of which require quick thinking and decisive action.
Those are the inherent risks of being in the mountains. It's important to be aware of them and trust your guide's judgment in those situations.
Absolutely. That's why choosing a guide with extensive experience and a strong safety record is so important. Beyond the physical and logistical challenges, what are some of the mental or emotional hurdles someone might face? Fear is a big one. Fear of heights, fear of falling, fear of failure.
Those are very natural human responses to being in such a challenging and potentially dangerous environment.
They are, and it's important to acknowledge those fears, not try to suppress them. Work through them rather than letting them control you.
So how can someone overcome those fears?
Preparation is a big part of it. Knowing that you've trained well, you've got the right gear, and you're with a skilled guide can give you a lot of confidence.
It sounds like feeling prepared and supported makes a big difference.
It does. And then it's about taking things one step at a time. Focus on the present moment, on what you're doing right now, and try not to let your mind race ahead to potential dangers.
So staying present and mindful is key.
Exactly. And trust yourself. Trust your abilities and believe that you can overcome the challenges that come your way.
We've discussed the challenges, but what about the rewards? What are some of the benefits that come from pushing yourself and achieving these summits?
The feeling of accomplishment is incredible. Standing on top of a mountain after all that effort, that's a special kind of satisfaction.
It's a tangible reward for all the perseverance you've put in.
Exactly. And being up in the mountains often gives you a shift in perspective. You see the world differently from that vantage point.
It's a literal and figurative change of perspective.
You got it. There's a
Yeah.
humbling sense of awe that comes with realizing how small we are in the grand scheme of things.
I imagine there's a renewed appreciation for the simple things in life, too.
Absolutely. Things like fresh air, clean water, and a warm bed take on a whole new meaning. And then there are the benefits that translate into other parts of life as well. The resilience, the determination, the problem-solving skills. It's an experience that empowers you to believe in your own ability to overcome challenges, no matter what they are.
We talked about Rosales' speed records and how that adds a layer of intrigue to his expeditions, but I'm curious about speed climbing itself. What draws people to that particular style of mountaineering?
I think for some, it's the thrill of the challenge. They want to push their limits physically and mentally and see how fast they can go. It's an adrenaline rush.
It's like racing against yourself in the clock.
Exactly. For others, it's about being as efficient as possible. They want to find the most efficient way to move through the mountains, minimize their gear, and make every movement count.
So it's a combination of athleticism and strategy.
Exactly. And for many, it's about pushing the boundaries of what's possible, seeing how far they can go, what their limits are.
It's a niche within a niche, attracting those who are driven to push themselves to the extreme.
It definitely is. And it's not for everyone, but for those who are drawn to it, it can be an incredibly rewarding and intensely personal challenge.
We focused a lot on the positive aspects of mountaineering, but it's important to acknowledge that there are potential downsides as well. What are some things people should be aware of before they embark on an expedition like this?
Well, as we discussed, there are inherent risks involved in mountaineering, and it's essential to be prepared for those. Altitude sickness, unpredictable weather, the possibility of accidents, those are all things to consider.
Those are the realities of being in the mountains, and it's important to respect those risks.
Exactly. And you have to be realistic about the physical toll these expeditions can take. You're pushing yourself to your limits, and recovery can take time.
So listening to your body and being mindful of your physical limits is essential.
It is, and the mental and emotional challenges shouldn't be overlooked. Being in a remote and challenging environment can be stressful, and it's important to be prepared for that,
So mental toughness and resilience are key qualities to cultivate.
for sure. And then there's the cost factor. Mountaineering expeditions can be expensive, so it's something to consider when making your decision.
The gear, the guide fees, the travel expenses, it all adds up.
It does. And we can't forget about the environmental impact. Mountaineering can have negative consequences for fragile mountain ecosystems, so it's essential to minimize your footprint and travel responsibly.
So it's about being mindful of your impact on the environment and the communities you're visiting.
Exactly. Responsible and sustainable tourism is crucial for preserving these incredible places for future generations.
Speaking of sustainability, what are some ways you can make a mountaineering expedition more responsible?
That's an important question. I think the first step is choosing a guide who prioritizes sustainability and has a good track record of responsible tourism practices.
The guide really sets the tone for the whole experience, so that choice matters.
Absolutely. And look for things like leave no trace principles, which promote responsible outdoor ethics. It's about minimizing your impact on the environment and leaving it as you found it.
What about some practical tips for minimizing your impact?
Pack light. Bring reusable water bottles and food containers, and avoid single-use plastics as much as possible. Be mindful of your water usage, dispose of waste properly, and respect wildlife and their habitats.
It's all about being a responsible steward of the environment,
Exactly, and think about supporting local communities and businesses.
buying local products or services.
Yes, it's a great way to give back and contribute to the local economy. And don't underestimate the power of sharing your experiences and encouraging others to follow sustainable practices.
It's about leading by example and inspiring others to make a difference.
Exactly. Our collective choices can have a huge impact on the future of these mountains and the communities that rely on them.
You mentioned choosing a guide who prioritizes sustainability. What are some questions you can ask to assess their commitment to responsible tourism?
That's a crucial part of the decision-making process. Ask about their specific environmental policies and practices. Do they follow leave no trace principles? How do they handle waste disposal? Do they use biodegradable soaps and cleaning products?
Those are good practical questions. What about the social responsibility side of things?
Ask about their hiring practices. Do they employ local guides and support staff? Do they pay fair wages and provide good working conditions?
It's about making sure the expedition benefits the local community as well.
Exactly. And you can ask about cultural sensitivity as well. Do they respect local cultures and traditions? Do they provide opportunities for cultural exchange?
It's about creating a respectful and enriching experience for everyone involved.
Absolutely. And don't be afraid to ask for references or testimonials from previous clients. That can give you a good sense of their overall commitment to responsible tourism.
It's all about doing your research and making a conscious choice to support businesses that are making a positive impact. What advice would you give to someone who is considering their first mountaineering expedition?
It's an exciting time, filled with anticipation and maybe a bit of nervousness. My first piece of advice would be to start small and build up your experience gradually. Don't try to tackle Everest on your first trip.
Okay, so set realistic goals and progress at a pace that feels comfortable.
Exactly. Choose a guide who has experience working with beginners and can provide the right support and guidance.
A knowledgeable and patient guide can make a world of difference.
Absolutely. And don't underestimate the importance of being prepared, both physically and mentally.
Train your body and your mind for the challenges ahead.
Yes. And be open to stepping outside your comfort zone and embracing the unexpected. That's where the real growth happens. But most importantly, have fun and enjoy the journey.
It's all about the experience, the memories, and the personal transformation that comes from pushing yourself and connecting with the power of nature.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
We've talked a lot about the big picture, but let's get back to the essentials. What are some key pieces of equipment a first-time mountaineer should invest in?
We've already mentioned good mountaineering boots is a top priority. But beyond that, you'll need crampons and an ice axe, depending on the expedition you're doing.
Those are the tools of the trade, so to speak. What about clothing?
Layering is essential in the mountains. You'll need base layers to wick away moisture, insulating layers for warmth, and a waterproof outer shell to protect you from the elements.
So being prepared for all kinds of weather is key.
Exactly. You'll also want gloves, a hat, and sunglasses for protection from the sun and wind. And don't forget about a backpack to carry all of your gear, a warm sleeping bag, a sleeping pad, and a headlamp for those early morning starts or late night treks back to camp.
Those little details can really make or break a trip, can't they?
They can. And a well-stocked first aid kit is essential for any adventure.
Speaking of essentials, what kind of budget should a first-time mountaineer expect for a trip like this? We've touched on the fact that it can be expensive, but what are some of the factors that influence the cost?
That's a great question, and the budget really depends on a few key things.
Like what?
The destination is a big one. Expeditions to remote or challenging peaks are usually more expensive because of the logistics involved.
I imagine things like transportation, permits, and needing more specialized guides and equipment can all add to the cost.
Exactly. And then the length of the expedition plays a role too. Longer trips cost more because you're paying for more days of guiding, meals, and accommodations.
Makes sense. And I imagine the level of comfort or luxury you're looking for also impacts the price.
For sure. Staying in lodges or hotels will be more expensive than camping, and some expeditions offer more amenities like gourmet meals or porters to carry your gear, which can add to the overall cost.
So there's really a range of options to fit different budgets and preferences.
Exactly. It's all about doing your research and finding the right balance between cost and experience.
We've covered a lot of practical advice, but I'm always curious about the deeper lessons people take away from these kinds of adventures. What are some of the life lessons you've learned from mountaineering that have translated into other areas of your life?
Mountaineering isn't just about conquering peaks. It's about pushing yourself beyond your perceived limits. It's a great metaphor for life in general.
I like that the mountains is a metaphor for life's challenges.
Exactly. And one of the most important lessons I've learned is perseverance. When you're facing a difficult climb, it's easy to want to give up, but if you just keep going, one step at a time, you can achieve incredible things.
So it's about breaking down huge goals into smaller, more manageable steps.
Exactly. Another crucial lesson is the importance of teamwork. In the mountains, you rely on your team for support and encouragement. And that's true in life, too. We all need people to help us along the way.
We don't have to go it alone.
Absolutely. And then there's the importance of being present and mindful. In the mountains, you can't afford to be distracted or careless. You need to focus completely on what you're doing.
It's about being grounded in the present moment and paying attention to your surroundings.
Exactly. That's a valuable skill to have no matter what you're doing, whether it's climbing a mountain or navigating life's everyday challenges.
I know mountaineering can seem intimidating, especially for those who are new to it. What advice would you give to someone who's feeling that way?
It's totally understandable to feel intimidated. These mountains are massive and demand respect. My advice is to shift your focus. Instead of dwelling on the size of the mountain, focus on taking the first step.
So don't get overwhelmed by the big picture. Break it down into smaller, more manageable steps.
Exactly. And remember, everyone starts somewhere. Every experienced climber was once a beginner, taking those first tentative steps.
It's about respecting the learning curve and acknowledging that it's okay to start small.
It is, and that's where having the right guide and choosing the right expedition for your skill level is so important. Start with something achievable, build your confidence, and then challenge yourself more as you gain experience.
It's a journey, not a race.
That's a great way to put it. And at the end of the day, remember that the mountains are there to be enjoyed, not feared. With the right preparation and the right mindset, anyone can experience the incredible rewards of mountaineering.
So what does all of this mean for you? You've got a wealth of information to work with as you plan your adventure in Peru. We've explored Cesar Rosales' vast experience, the incredible range of trekking and expedition options he offers, from challenging summits to stunning treks.
We've also delved into the essential gear you'll need, talked about safety considerations, and highlighted the importance of sustainable tourism.
And we've even explored the philosophical and spiritual aspects of mountaineering.
We've covered a lot of ground.
We really have. But here's a final thought for you to consider. We talked about Rosales' speed records and how they add another element to his expeditions. But what if, instead of focusing on speed, you thought about slowing down? What if you focused on immersing yourself completely in the experience?
I love that idea.
Imagine yourself on the Huayhuash trek, surrounded by towering peaks and turquoise lagoons. You're not rushing to the next campsite, you're savoring every step, soaking in the beauty, connecting with the environment, and really taking the time to engage with the local people.
What a powerful shift in perspective. It's about moving from a mindset of conquering the mountains to a mindset of connecting with them.
And it's about understanding that the journey itself is the reward.
Beautifully said.
So whether you're drawn to the challenge of a speed ascent or the serenity of a mindful trek, we hope this deep dive has provided you with all the knowledge and inspiration you need to plan your own unforgettable Peruvian adventure.
Happy planning.
It's such a powerful image, trading the rush of speed for the richness of truly experiencing the mountains and the culture.
It's about finding what resonates with you, right? Whether it's pushing your limits or finding peace in the stillness of nature.
Speaking of pushing limits, you mentioned earlier that even the moderate climbs can be physically demanding because of the altitude. What does that actually feel like for someone who's not used to it?
Well, it's hard to describe unless you've experienced it firsthand. It's like every movement takes twice the effort. You find yourself gasping for breath, doing things that would be easy at sea level. It's humbling, for sure.
It sounds like it really tests your mental fortitude as much as your physical strength.
It absolutely does. Altitude can really mess with your head, too. You might feel dizzy, lightheaded, or even have trouble thinking straight. It's so important to stay hydrated, listen to your body, and descend if you're not feeling right.
So it's not just about being physically fit. It's about being mentally prepared for the unique challenges of high altitude.
Exactly. And that's another reason why having an experienced guide like Rosales is so valuable.
Yeah.
He knows how to recognize the signs of altitude sickness and can make informed decisions to keep everyone safe.
We've touched on the idea that mountaineering can be a journey of self-discovery. Have you experienced that personally? What kind of insights or transformations have you encountered through your own climbing experiences?
You know, it's interesting. When you're in the mountains, stripped down to the bare essentials, facing challenges that push you to your limits, you really discover what you're made of. It can be a powerful mirror to hold up to yourself.
It sounds like it has the potential to reveal strengths you didn't even know you had.
Absolutely. I've learned that I'm a lot more resilient than I thought I was, and I've also realized the importance of being adaptable and flexible because in the mountains, as in life, things don't always go according to plan.
So those lessons learned on the mountain translate into valuable life skills.
They really do. Mountaineering has taught me to embrace challenges, to trust myself, and to never give up on my goals, no matter how difficult they may seem.
Those are powerful lessons. We've been focusing primarily on the physical and mental aspects of mountaineering, but I think there's a spiritual dimension to it as well. Have you experienced that sense of connection to something larger than yourself when you're in the mountains?
There's no doubt about it. There's something about being surrounded by those towering peaks, those vast glaciers, that sense of immense scale and power that really puts things in perspective. It makes you feel small, but in a good way. It reminds you that you're part of something much bigger than yourself.
It's like connecting to the raw, primal energy of nature.
Exactly. And it can be a very humbling and grounding experience. It's a reminder to approach life with a sense of awe and gratitude.
So it's not just about the physical challenge. It's about the emotional and spiritual transformation that can occur in the mountains.
Absolutely. It's an opportunity to reconnect with yourself, with nature, and with something larger than yourself.
Well, I think we've covered just about everything on this deep dive into Cesar Rosales and his expeditions. You've learned about his impressive background and the incredible range of adventures he offers, from challenging summits to stunning treks.
We've talked about the importance of acclimatization, the essential gear you'll need, and the importance of sustainable tourism. We've even delved into the mental and spiritual aspects of mountaineering.
So if you're looking for an adventure that will challenge you physically, mentally, and spiritually, Cesar Rosales expeditions might be just what you're looking for.
And remember, whether you're drawn to the thrill of a speed ascent or the tranquility of a mindful trek, the mountains are calling.
Happy planning.